I am Daniel Lucas, and welcome to Book 101 Review. Book 101 is all about the books that I read for the last 40 years, and today I have my special guest. He's the author of several books, no other than Mr. Gallagher Green.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be back on here.
Welcome back, Mr. Gallagher. And as usual, can you please introduce yourself?
Yes, well, I'm Gallagher Green. I am a novelist of four books at the moment, but I'm still always writing and putting out more. I live out in Kansas, USA, in a very rural area and environment. And so writing's just what I do as much as I can.
Writing is your passion. And thank you so much for sharing your talents to the world. Looking forward for more books to come. So, Mr. Gallagher, can you tell us what novel we're gonna talk about today?
Well, I believe we're talking about We're Not Queens, We're Bitches. And the title alone tells you a lot right there on what you're going to be picking up.
So, what is the main idea or theme of this novel?
Well, I this novel is about a character who is a side character from my first two books, Love Sorry and the In Between, and Born of Death. And she started in the first book as literally just being there in like one line. I needed an antagonist to be a bully, and so I needed a character who was just a bully and to start something because I needed that pinnacle point for other characters. And then in the second point, I needed a bully in that second book, and I thought, let's bring her back. We know who she is. We know she's mean. Let's do it again. And toward the end of that book, I actually ended up giving her two chapters because I suddenly started feeling like there's a reason that she would be a bully. There's a reason she would be mean. At that point, she had become a very bad alcoholic. And I kind of started there because I just wanted to show that, she was turning around. She realized she wasn't a bad person. There had just been a lot of bad situations in her life. And I thought that would be the end of it, right there with that. I thought two chapters in a book that's not even hers, that's pretty darn good for a side character. And then I found myself continuing to think about it, and I thought, let's just continue on. So I decided to write this, and it's a year after that book, and it's complete standalone, so you don't need to read the others to read it. And yeah, it's about her, and after she's become sober, and she still, of course, struggles with her addictions, and how life has kind of been. Because she also, not only did she decide to just straighten up and stop drinking and partying, because she kind of hit that point in her life where you realize you're no longer a teenager or in your early 20s. You're getting too old for this, and some things start happening with consequences. And
So
she also
this,
decides she's going to be a better person.
so
And
this,
go ahead, yeah.
go ahead. So this will be a sequel for another book of yours.
Well, it is technically, you could call it a sequel, but it is complete standalone. It's about a side character, and so if you can read this book, it can be the first one of my works you'll read. And I made sure I never spoiled anything but you'll notice some characters popping up. And so, even though it doesn't spoil anything from the other books, I made sure of that. So it's a standalone, but if you've read the others, it'll fall right in and it'll give you that context of what happened to this character. So it is both a standalone and a sequel, if that makes sense.
Yes. We are not queens. Who is your target audience for the story?
Yeah, because she comes to the conclusion that, well, trying to be a nice person, it's really easy that when you're a nice person, people walk all over you. And that's kind of what she finds out. Well, she's at work, she's a waiter at a restaurant, and she's used to people kind of groping at her and everything, and she just keeps ignoring it because she's trying to be a nice person. She's not supposed to confront people. She's not supposed to be, mean or anything. And she kind of finally just snaps one day and semi attacks somebody who does grabs her, and that's when it's later. It's a little bit after this, and I'm not giving any spoilers. But when she's with her sister, who she's been staying with while she's been working on staying sober, her sister's listening to some one of those like trendy pop songs where it says, like everybody's a queen and so on. And she tells her sister that's real easy for somebody who's making billions of dollars off of you to say, because for the rest of us out there, we're not queens, we're bitches. Because we don't get that. You can't say you're a queen when you're being abused or treated horribly. that is just not a fair thing to say. So she's just that's kind of her statement, and her turning point is to just accept the fact you're not a queen, you're a bitch. And so just, you can't be nice all the time. And that's kind of the way that's kind of the theme of this whole book. Is she doesn't become a bad person. She just starts owning her own power again and no longer letting people take advantage of her.
What genre does We're Not Queens novel
I
fit
would
into?
say it falls into contemporary literary fiction, I'd say, is I think where it sits the most. There is a little bit of a romance element to it, but not much. It's more the backstory of it. It kind of just is happening at the same time. It is a sapphic book, so it is LGBTQIA plus book. And because for those who don't know, that's primarily all I write at the moment. That's the characters I like to write. And yeah.
Who are the main characters? Oh, We're Not Queens.
The main characters would be Ashley. That's our main person that you're seeing all the time through here, and that I'm talking about right now. And there's basically only two other main characters. Actually, there's three main characters outside of her, and one is the sister who is Madison that she has been staying with while she's kind of getting sober, and she has some issues with her sister because her sister kind of her life's not easy, but her life definitely is going well and is really progressing nicely. And it kind of just irritates her. You know how that is. If things aren't going well for you, people that are successful sometimes kind of just get under your skin. And also, it's a sibling too. Siblings understand this, but and then the other main character is her best friend Crystal, and she's in it the most outside of the Ashley. And then there's one more character, and I won't. I honestly am having trouble remembering his name, and the reason why is because he's an unhoused person she meets on the street who's older and has been on the street most of his life, and he really doesn't have a name in the book. She kind of just comes across him and starts talking with him, and so she enjoys talking with him because he's somebody that understands the idea that sometimes life just doesn't get better for you, and it is hard every step of the way. And so he's also a turning point for her is meeting somebody like that instead of someone who is successful and then trying to tell you how to be successful.
So, how did you plan and develop the protagonist over the course of the story?
Yeah, she was a little more difficult. I'd say I don't plan stuff too much. I try to just let it grow as I write. But it was difficult because I start out with at a point where she isn't in a good place, and so writing from that emotional place of where like she's wanting to drink again after a year, and she's you know just a path she's walking that evening. It's dark, it's heavy, and that's when she meets the unhoused guy, and he's kind of what stops her from going and getting that drink, even though he doesn't know it. And so it was a real progression to kind of slowly try to work a character into that. And she doesn't trust easily because of her past, and she didn't have a great time. She had a very hard life growing up, and so she doesn't trust easy. So it was hard building that character from that place of being in such a dark place and then learning to kind of trust again and realizing that not everybody is terrible or out to use you. So it was a difficult and time, and I really kind of went easy at it and paid attention. And writing things like that can be very emotionally taxing because you put yourself so much into the role of it, and you find yourself thinking about it all the time. And to get in the mood, I'll throw music on that is so depressing and just terrible at points. It's the kind of music that really does not make you want to live anymore. And so I'm listening to that while writing in a dark room. And so that's how I develop a character.
Very well said, Mr. Gallagher. Very well said. We are not queens, we're bitches. Is this your first choice of the title of this novel?
It isn't. The first choice I think was beginnings from Ash, since her name's Ashley. And to be honest, I was never crazy about it, and I do all my own cover design. And so as I was designing the cover, I went to type the name of it and I couldn't remember what it was. And I thought if I can't remember the title of my own novel, that is a sign that it is not the right title for this book. And so I kind of started to think about it. And then for some reason, I just thought of that line, "We're not queens, we're bitches." And I thought it's a little bit maybe edgy for a title to be slapped on the front of a book. But I don't know, it felt right and it felt grabby. And it kind of just felt like if you just see that title, you're instantly going to have a feeling of what this book's going to be like. It's going to be a little gritty. It's going to be a little bit tougher. It isn't a soft title. You know what you're getting into. And I like that about it. So it was lucky it ended up with that title because it almost ended up with something that wouldn't have been as good.
What is the center conflict in We're Not Queens?
The center of conflict, I would say, is although she does have a little trouble with the alcoholism at the beginning, for the most part, her friend Crystal is also a recovering alcoholic and has been in recovery much longer. So she's not like her sponsor, but a little bit she's there for her. She knows what's been like. So that ends up not being as much. And I'd say it kind of comes down to the center conflict is learning to trust people again. And even in relationships and everything, she has a lot of trouble just trusting anyone. There's just it's a lot of trauma healing in the past, trusting others to open up enough and tell them about like what happened. And there's a point like that with the friend Crystal where she finally tells her what it was she did that made her realize she needed to straighten up. She needed to stop drinking because she realized one day that she had done something absolutely horrible and that she just couldn't bear that she had turned into this person because her parents had been alcoholics, and since they had been, her father was not a great person and semi-abusive. And then suddenly she looked up one day and realized she was the same way. And so it's mostly just getting past this trauma of trying to figure out, and it's not even trying to figure out. It's just living and learning. When you start talking to other people, you just start noticing things about yourself you didn't expect, and it's really just about trying to get her life back on track and to become a functioning person that doesn't need a substance to help her, that is independent but willing to trust others and accept help when she needs it. And so that's the conflict is very mild and very realistic. I think it's something that a lot of people relate to because most of us have trouble really relying and asking for help from other people.
How did you plan the structure of We're Not Queens?
I really just am a discovery writer. And so I wrote the first where she's at the beginning there where I said she was walking down the sidewalk and it wasn't good and it was dark and she was not sure what she was going to do. And I just kind of kept expanding on that structure. And so since I don't really plot, and given it's a contemporary fiction, there's not much like world building or anything like that that you see in fantasies and such. So I kind of just I write it in first person present perspective. And so it's very much of I learn as the reader learns. And so there are always in all my novels there's always things that happen that I also didn't expect happening. They just kind of do. And so yeah, the structure is a little bit harder for me to pin down on how I build it because I always feel like I don't build my structures, which I know that sounds terrible and it isn't good advice for people, but I feel like we all work our own ways. And so I guess my structure is just very loose. And on this one, I think basically all I knew was where I started, and I knew I just wanted her to end at being a better person. And so that's why I just tried to fill in the in between.
Yes. So, how did you set the tone or mood in We're Not Queens?
I really wanted to make sure that I started at, like I said, that dark place and then kind of progressively lighten it up and make it a brighter novel. I think of it to myself as like starting in this like really dark noir black and white style if it was a film, and then just slowly gaining little bits of color and saturation until finally it's in full color at the end. And that's how I envisioned it when I was writing it and how I tried to kind of pace myself. So I kind of had this slow burn up to her being a functioning person again and happier. So that's kind of what I tried to do, and I feel like it worked. But there's always kind of this little back and forth, and so yeah, that's about all I really had to do. And I kind of once again I always say I use music, and I did that with music too. So I kind of slowly start changing the music I listen to as I go until you're just back up to slightly happier type music instead of the stuff that makes you want to stop living.
So, how did you plan in developing the setting?
I I planned a little because I knew she was working at like I said, she worked at a restaurant as a waiter and is the same restaurant that her sister was working at. And I knew she needed to get past that and needed to stop living with her sister because she needed to get back out on her own. And so the setting was I wanted her to move out of that situation and across town to kind of get her a new start in life. And so that's what she does. And it's not really a spoiler, but she goes and lives with her friend Crystal because rent's high and you got to have a roommate. So that's what she does on the other end of town. And I also wanted her to get out of her comfort zone, and so I have her start working at a cemetery of all things because and doing groundskeeping type work there. So that was kind of what I wanted to do, just slowly just progress and move her out onto her own, kind of growing up late in life, I guess.
Yes, definitely. Before we go on, Mr. Gallagher, I just want to shout out those people listening in Suriname. Thank you so much because I'm number 13 on the Apple charts. And Thailand, Ghana, and thank you so much. And of course, my other podcast, Geography 101. Thank you, United States, Canada, Poland, Saudi Arabia, and of course, the United States. And of course, my Food 101. Thank you, Canada, Thailand, Indonesia, United Arab Emirates, and the Philippines. Thank you so much for supporting all my podcasts. I hope you will continue supporting this podcast or all my podcasts because they empower, to inform, and to give you knowledge to be best excellent in everyday life. So, Mr. Gallagher, what is the climax of this novel? We're not queens.
Let me see how I can say this without spoiling anything.
No
But
spoiler.
so the climax I would say is that she finds herself unexpectedly being the same playing the same role for somebody else that someone played for her that really saved her and pulled her out of who knows where she might have gone or done. Suddenly she realizes that she was that person for somebody else without even realizing it. So the climax really is where she goes from being this person who desperately needs help from a stranger, and that stranger most likely saved her life, to suddenly she's talking to a stranger and she ends up doing the same thing for them. And so that's really the climax, is where she finally unknowingly hits this point where she has become the hero that she once needed.
Good job. No spoiler.
It is hard to tell sometimes without talking about
Yes.
spoilers.
So, how will the novel ending resolve the conflict or leave the reader thinking?
I think really it kind of since the conflict is really pretty low in this novel, I'd say it would leave the reader thinking and remembering that not everybody out there is going to use you or treat you terrible, that there are people you can reach out to. And in one situation she learns that too. She just finds out, she realizes that she instantly assumes people will be against her if something happens and she would like come forward and ask for help, they'll instantly be against her, and she realizes that they won't be, that they were mad that they didn't come to, that she didn't come to them because they wanted to help her. And so I'd say that is the big takeaway, is to know that not everybody out there is absolute trash of a human being, and that sometimes there are people out there that will help you and want to help you. And that even though you do want to be careful, that you do need to trust people sometimes. And so I'd say that's the biggest takeaway, is to know that you can also do it and you can make it past whatever struggles you're in, and that there are people out there who want to help you.
Yes. Trust people sometimes, people, not all the times.
Yeah.
So, how did you incorporate dialogue to reveal character traits and move the plot forward?
My novels are always pretty dialogue heavy, and I always say that's partially because since we're just kind of in modern times, in modern situations, I don't need to explain to you what a sidewalk looks like. We've all walked down one, so we're just focusing on the dialogue, not the sidewalk. And normally with dialogue, what I like to do is dialogue always leads us places. We can start somewhere with just a mundane conversation about very little of nothing if we're walking down the street with somebody. And it'll slowly grow, and until all of a sudden we're in a very serious topic or something triggers the character and it's very upsetting. And that is once again a non-spoilers part, but where she's walking down the street with Crystal and they're in a less than great neighborhood. And it's a neighborhood she used to hang out in a lot because there were a lot of bars and stuff. And the friend says something about, like, kind of an insult toward like the people who frequent those like strip clubs and things like that and stuff. And it really triggers her. And she says, that she used to dance at those clubs when she needed money, when she was hard up for money because she wanted to drink. She would do those things, and it went from a dialogue of just walking down the street making comments to something triggering her, and it revealing something really deep in her that she had never really told anybody on how the things she had done, and that you shouldn't, that it really insulted her that someone would say these things, people just trying to like get by and stuff. So dialogue is great about that. You can start with something small and you can just keep building it until there's all of a sudden a trigger or just something reminds you, or it just slowly is a gradual build. And so I try to keep my dialogue very natural and normal feeling, because conversations can easily turn into that. And so it's something to remember that no conversation in a book is too small. If you just let it go and you let it explore where it wants to go, sooner or later it'll turn into something bigger, even if you don't plan on it being like that. And it'll reveal a lot in the story that you don't always think will happen.
Yes. So how do you balance showing versus telling in your writing style?
I generally only like to tell if it's absolutely necessary. Like I said, kind of like with like a sidewalk, or kind of like I do. I always say it's like with apartments. There's somebody's apartment or house. If there's not a specific reason that I need to like tell why the structure is a certain way, unless it's going to come up in the book or the story for some reason, I don't, because we all know what apartments look like. We know what stairways look like. We live in these environments all the time, so there's no reason to describe them unless you really need to. And so that's why I normally am much more around the dialogue, and it'll come up in other ways. But yeah, it's something that kind of comes along like in contemporary, more so than the fantasy type worlds and stuff. Is there, you don't have to really tell very much. You can just kind of show through their actions and what they're doing.
Yes, very well said. Very well said, Mr. Gallagher. And what techniques did you use to make your characters feel real and relatable?
I always paying attention is good. I got a friend in New York City, and she has three roommates, and it's normally always something. There's if it's yeah, it's always a mess. It seems like it's always tell her that I always joke with her. It's like every time you tell me about something like that, I'm making like these little notes about things they did or their character traits or how they reacted. It's like because that's what you want to do. You just want to pay attention because there's just so much out there in either media or the people around you, and just remember the way people act, their personalities. And so I'll just kind of envision and think about a similar personality. Maybe I saw somewhere or in somebody or even in a movie or TV show and think, that's a little bit, I want a little bit of that trait in them. And then I just go from there. It normally starts on rather not the person's going to be like a sunshine person or a grumpy person, because it seems like those are your two most basic traits between people. Is either they're happy and bubbly or they're not. And so you can start there and then build out. So I try to keep them as authentic as I can, but it's difficult. And to be honest, it's always a fear, because when you're writing, it's harder to see it if they're unique or different or anything. So I rely a lot on outside sources on how they think they feel. And so far, it seems okay. But sometimes when I'm writing myself, it doesn't feel like they're very unique when they actually are, because I think I've lived with them too long and they've become normal to me.
How did you incorporate the subplots to add depth in the main storyline?
Subplots are kind of something that I feel like come from letting your main storyline wander a little bit. And so if you just don't stick too stringently to it, you'll find the little subplots coming out. And that's kind of what I would say I ended up with. This novel is not as long as some, so there aren't quite as many subplots, and the character base is a little smaller. The more characters you have running around in your story, you're going to end up with a lot more subplots. But I'd say like one subplot is when she kind of reconnects with one of her old friends from the back when she partied. She grew up with her through high school, and then she when she decided to go sober, she just basically blocked this friend because she knew she was still drinking and partying, and she just didn't. She knew she couldn't have that in her life while she was trying to not do these things. And so one of the side plots would be just bringing her back in, and it was a side plot where I kind of realized that originally I wasn't going to bring her in. I was just going to have her continue to avoid her. And then I realized, like, a nice little side plot here would be have her confront this person and kind of tell her why in her side of it and, kind of talk it out in a way. And so that's what I did. And it became a nice little side plot that I hadn't planned on. And there's another one with another character who's a side character. Once again, it was about a half chapter long. It was just a nice little subplot of a conversation where she kind of gets to know somebody that she ends up trusting that she hadn't known before. So you just gotta let characters wander. Sometimes it'll just be like a waiter at a restaurant or something in your story, and you just kind of let them tell a little bit of a story, and it might turn to a subplot or it might not, and you can just kind of have to feel it out. And it's an easy way to incorporate things instead of just like starting a subplot on its own. If you just let it branch instead from the main story.
What is your revision process for refining the first draft of We're Not Queens?
I don't do a lot for first draft. I always tell people it's because I'm lazy. The idea of rewriting something after a first draft, it just makes me want to cry. And so I try to get it all right the first time. And so when I'm done with a novel, the only thing left to do is to go through it and fix grammatical errors, typos, small things that slip in like that. And occasionally, there'll be like a sentence or something that you read it and you think, what am I even talking about here? And it's because you forgot some words or mixed some things up. But that happens once in a while. But I don't have a lot of revision. It's mostly just fixing the little technical things. And so that's just how I happen to write. I know a lot of people write other ways, and that's one of the great things. If you just do what works for you.
Yes, yes, yes. And for the last question, Mr. Gallagher, how do you know when We're Not Queens is finished and ready for publication or submission?
That was a little harder with this one because it didn't have that big like grandiose climax. It's easier when you have a big evil villain that they can fight at the end and and kill or something. But when you don't have that, it gets a little more difficult. And so I struggled a little with ending this book for that reason. I wanted to have a good ending, but I knew that it needed to have an ending, but it wasn't so fast paced that there would be a super ending. So it kind of just ends when she hits a point in her relationship. And I don't want to spoil anything, but it kind of hits this point when you realize it's like she's finally getting past the point and she can trust even the people that are closest to her. She's starting to trust them again. And the way she talks, the way she's wording things, the way she okay, it's not really giving anything. It's when she finally hits the point that she can actually say that she's dating somebody. For a long time they're not dating, they kind of just like know each other because she like literally can't get herself to say that she's in a relationship. It's like something she can't do and it's really hard. So the story gets to this point where she can finally do these things. She can finally tell people that she's in a relationship. She can finally be open and she can go visit family without problems. And so that's kind of where I decided to end it. It's just when she's finally at the point where she's happy, she has a good life, and she's no longer struggling like she was.
Very well said. Very well said, Mr. Gallagher. And please tune in tomorrow. I'll be featuring my feature author of the month of November. He's award-winning author and best-selling author too, Mr. Everett Jones. So please do tune in tomorrow, the same time, 4 p.m. PST. So, Mr. Gallagher Green, can you please invite our listeners to support all your books?
Yeah, you can find me on like TikTok and Instagram at Gallagher.author. I'm sorry, Gallagher.green.author. And you can find my webpage at goldenartpublishing.com. And I have all my books there. And you can also just go to your local bookstore and tell them you want to order it if you want it. I always tell people it's like support your local bookstore. So go to them and just tell them what you want and they'll order it for you.
Yes, yes, yes. People will support Mr. Gallagher Green because if you support him, more books to come. So, Mr. Gallagher Green, thank you for your time.
Yes, thank you so much for having me on again. It was great.
More to come, people. See you soon. So, I usually